for our weekend picks. We got a big unification fight coming up this weekend. Long-anticipated match with the big boys at 175. The IBF champion, Artur Beterbiev. The WBC champion, Alexander Gvozdyk. A genuine 50-50 fight for more reasons than one. When it comes to a guy like Artur Beterbiev, when a guy's got that kind of power, those kinds of heavy hands, he can end the fight at virtually any point in the fight. That's a part of what makes it a 50-50 fight, that even if you think Gvozdyk is the more polished and defensively responsible fighter in the fight, at the end of the day, one lapse in judgment, just one, could cost him the entire match, because that's the kind of puncher that Artur Beterbiev is. 50-50 fight indeed. In this kind of a situation, you really can't fault anyone for who they decide to go with, who they pick to win, because, well, it's a 50-50 fight. Either guy can take it, but I will say that from the moment that this fight was announced, in spite of it being a 50-50 fight, I'd have to say that I've been leaning towards Alexander Gvozdyk, his situational awareness, his movement, his jab. He knows his range, he knows when to throw it to set up that quality straight right hand, and even when he's not launching the jab, he's gesturing with it, showing that left hand, reminding the other guy that it's there, and that it will meet him at the front door if he so decides to come through it. When you got an aggressive guy like Artur Beterbiev, he's aggressive with good reason. It's because he believes in his power, and he's got it. For what it's worth, I think that Artur Beterbiev, physically, out of these two guys, physically, I'd have to say that I think he's the more durable fighter in the fight, but I also think he's the fighter in the fight who's susceptible to more punishment because of his aggressive approach, because he's more likely than not to come out guns blazing looking for a knockout. And you know what they say about looking for a knockout. When you're looking for one, you're running the risk of being knocked out, or at minimum, to be knocked down. Both these guys have tasted the canvas before. Both Alexander Gvozdyk and Artur Beterbiev have had to pick themselves up off the floor to secure the victories. Gvozdyk, he was actually knocked down in the first round of his fight with Tommy Karpency. In turn, Artur Beterbiev, he's been knocked down 2 times. Once against Jeff Page, and then again against Callum Johnson. And I think that, if Beterbiev's down, if he's been down more times than Gvozdyk, his aggressive approach really has a lot to do with that. That he's the come forward guy. He's the aggressive guy. And
well, Gvozdyk's been down.
While Gvozdyk himself has had to pick himself up off the canvas, comparatively, one of these guys is more defensively responsible than the other. One guy knows how to fight on the front foot and the back foot.
Back foot.
More so than the other. One of these fighters is more malleable, more versatile, more well-rounded. And I believe that fighter is Alexander Gvozdyk, who can play both offense and defense and be equally sound. Be fluid, that he can be the guy on the defensive and he can be the aggressor when the situation calls for it. It's a 50-50 fight, make no mistake. And this may come down to a nose hair, in all honesty, because when you got two guys like this, one of which can end the fight at any time, almost anything can happen. But I feel that Gvozdyk being the more well-rounded fighter is what will make all the difference, or at minimum, it's why I edge him to win this thing. I think that Artur Beterbiev is going to come out guns blazing the way he did with Gvozdyk, and that's going to afford Gvozdyk the opportunity to walk him into jabs, walk him into punches. That Gvozdyk fight with Artur Beterbiev, it didn't last very long, but there were moments, spots, where Gvozdyk was landing some interesting punches. And, you hypothesize that if a guy like Gvozdyk can get through with a shot every so often, walk Artur Beterbiev into an interesting uppercut, something along those lines, just imagine what a more polished boxer like Alexander Gvozdyk can do. I think that the aesthetic of this fight isn't going to be a chess match. I don't. I think that Artur is dangerous enough and will push the pace enough to where this will be a high-octane fight, and Gvozdyk will be forced to bring out the heavy artillery. But I think he can contend. I think he can respond in kind to Artur Beterbiev's aggression. I don't imagine that this fight is going to go to the cards. I don't see this one going the distance. Both these guys can knock the other guy down, can knock the other guy out. And I think that's how this fight is going to end. I'm envisioning a firefight. I'm envisioning a dust-up, not a finesse fight, not a chess match. I'm envisioning a fight where both guys are going to have to respond to their own brand of heavy artillery. Maybe Beterbiev scores a knockdown, maybe Gvozdyk scores 1 or 2 knockdowns. But when the smoke clears, I imagine that it's going to be Gvozdyk with his hand raised, and both the IBF and WBC titles in his clutches, because I feel that Artur Beterbiev's aggression and his leaky defense in this situation, the fact that those holes haven't quite been patched up, this is the situation where it's going to cost him. This is the situation where it will work against him. You know, Artur's been in a situations to where he can afford to get away with those sins, you know, with the likes of a Gvozdyk, with the likes of a Johnson, a Koling, and Isidro Ranoni Prieto. That, you know, with those guys, yeah, you can afford to be that front foot guy, but the higher up in the ranks you climb, you know, the stiffer the competition becomes, the more those sins, the more you're running the risk of losing the fight because of the chances you're taking as the aggressor. I think that Gvozdyk can capitalize on those opportunities, set Artur up for a straight right hand coming through the front door that will put him down and could keep him there. Now, I will say that, you know, I'm leaning towards Gvozdyk. I am picking him to win the fight, but like I said, it's a 50-50 fight, and one thing I can think of that is working against Alexander Gvozdyk is that, you know, he's not an upper body movement kind of guy. You know, he's not the kind of guy who really angles his torso away from the punches and tries to roll them, you know. That way they don't land with full force. He's not that kind of guy. His methodology for getting out of the way of punches is to move out of position with his legs. His torso, however, is kind of upright while he's doing this. So it creates a situation to where, you know, maybe Artur lunges in, comes over the top with a big shot, and you know, Gvozdyk is close enough to the center line that it lands. That's more or less what I think is working against Gvozdyk. That in terms of his torso, perhaps he doesn't move it enough. But he's still defensively responsible, the more defensively responsible guy in the fight, so I like him to win this thing. It's not a lock, but I am picking Alexander Gvozdyk to win this fight, and win this fight by way of knockout or technical knockout, 6-7 rounds. You know, maybe more, because I reiterate, I think Artur is a very durable guy. You know, he's solid, this guy. Could take some doing to finally put him down and keep him there. I think it's going to take some doing, but I am going to go with Gvozdyk to win. Ukraine versus Russia, a rivalry that's not dissimilar from, you know, the Puerto Rico versus Mexico rivalry in the sport of boxing. This is that kind of a rivalry. This is that kind of a situation. Makes for a fantastic fight. I think this one is really going to be a barn burner for however long it lasts, though I don't think it's going to last very long. In terms of nuts and bolts, fight mechanics, what sold me on Gvozdyk winning this thing, it's got a lot to do with the jab and the jabbing contest. You'll notice that when Artur Beterbiev is trying to get within range to land the kind of punches that he wants to land, he fires a short kind of jab. You know, the kind of jab to where you're not really getting full extension, but you are looking to key your way in. But because he's not getting full extension on his jab, and because Alexander is, when it comes to his jab, you know, he fires a straight jab. You know, full extension on the punch, safely from the outside. And if a guy's getting too close for comfort, Alexander knows how to bounce out of range, you know, force the guy to try to keep up with him and walk him into a shot. That's more or less what sold me on Gvozdyk winning this thing, that he can get full extension on his punches safely from the outside, and because Artur is likely going to be the guy always coming forward, that affords Gvozdyk the opportunity to continually walk Artur into shots. Gvozdyk is the slightly more statuesque fighter in the fight who throws these straighter punches, fully capable of fighting his fight from the outside, whereas Artur has to close the gap, get within position to land those big punches. Thus, every time he tries to do this, he could end up getting peppered with a jab or walked into a straight right hand. And, you know, if Callum Johnson, if Jeff Page, if these kind of guys can put you down, it's safe to say that Gvozdyk could do a little better. So I reiterate, I'm leaning towards Alexander Gvozdyk to win by way of knockout or technical knockout. I realize it's a 50-50 fight, but if I'm going to go with a pony in the show, that's the pony I'm going with. I'm going with Alexander Gvozdyk to win this weekend and unify the IBF and WBC light heavyweight titles. Now, you may be asking yourself, does the winner of this fight get a spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list? And after careful consideration, given the nature of the bout, the track records of both the fighters, I'll have to say that if it's Beterbiev that wins, he won't get a spot on the list. If it's Beterbiev that wins. But if it's Gvozdyk, there's a solid argument there for him to emerge in the number 10 spot. Here's why. Alexander Gvozdyk already unseated a champion that was ranked on this list. He was ranked in the bottom tier, but better still, he was ranked. And that champion's name is Adonis Stevenson. So that creates a situation to where if Gvozdyk wins this weekend, he will have beaten two 2 world champions in his weight class, whereas for Artur, this will be the first, because when Artur became the IBF champion, the title itself was vacant. He didn't have to beat a champion to be a champion, whereas Gvozdyk did. And it just so happens that Gvozdyk is already the lineal light heavyweight champion. He's the man who beat the man being Adonis Stevenson. Adonis, like him or not, was the lineal champion at 175 pounds, and we know that Gvozdyk not only beat him, he retired him. If he beats Artur Beterbiev, that will be the second world champion he has unseated. So when we cross-compare these factoids to...
Who sits at number 10?
Julian Williams, who is currently ranked at number 10 in the bottom tier, in the most danger of being bumped off. Beating and unseating Artur Beterbiev would give Gvozdyk a stronger, more credible argument than that which is set forth by Julian Williams and his track record. Julian Williams achieved a rank on this list by beating Jarrett Hurd in his backyard and becoming the only unified champion in the junior middleweight division. However, Julian Williams is not the lineal at 154, whereas Gvozdyk already is, and if Gvozdyk beats Artur Beterbiev, he will have beaten 2 world champions to Julian Williams 1. Julian Williams has only beaten 1 world champion, and that world champion was Jarrett Hurd, whereas if Gvozdyk is successful this weekend, not only did he beat Adonis Stevenson, but he would have beaten Artur Beterbiev as well, making him not only a unified champion like Julian Williams, but he is already also the lineal champion at that weight. That would give Gvozdyk a stronger argument to be seated in the number 10 spot of the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, more so than Julian Williams. Whereas in the case of Beterbiev, if he would have won this weekend, it would be a little different, because if Beterbiev would have won, that would be the first world champion, the first active reigning world champion that he's ever beaten. Julian Williams, he's already been there and done that, except the world champion that he beat wasn't just a world champion, he was a unified champion. Thus, Julian's argument would yield more merit than Artur's comparatively, because while both these guys would have beaten the same number of world champions, the world champion that Julian beat was the consensus number 1 guy at the weight, and he was the unified champion at the time. Thus, Artur beating Gvozdyk doesn't strengthen his argument enough to where it would make sense for him to replace Julian on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. These are the statistics, these are the specifics that make up the governing criteria that determines who gets ranked and why. So in layman's terms, if Gvozdyk is successful this weekend, it adds just enough to his argument that he should bump Julian off. But if it's Artur, if he's the one who wins, well, those eggs are still going to need more bacon. Those eggs are going to need more bacon before he has a credible enough argument to be integrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. This weekend's fight is the kind of fight that will put the rest of the division on notice. You know, all those contenders climbing up the ranks via the IBF, via the WBC. Anybody who has aspirations of getting a belt, they're going to have to go through one guy to do it. At least anybody in the IBF and WBC's rank standings. Just as well, this weekend's fight puts the rest of the champions on notice. The likes of a Sergey Kovalev, who's going to be in action very soon against Canelo Alvarez. More immediately, the likes of a Dmitry Bivol, who wants to be involved in big fights, wants a unification match, wants to be involved in that kind of a situation. And I'll say that, you know, depending on who the victor is, that affects what kind of odds I'd give Dmitry Bivol in that situation. If it's Beterbiev, I think that Bivol is well-rounded enough that he stands a solid chance of winning. But if it's Gvozdyk, given that Gvozdyk is well-rounded in many of the same ways that Bivol is well-rounded, well, I feel like Gvozdyk would actually be a tougher test for Bivol than Artur would. You know, a lot of people are enamored with Artur's power, not realizing that defensively, there are some pretty decent-sized holes there. The kind of holes that a guy with fast hands, good athleticism, and good in and out game, the kind of guy that Bivol is. There are holes there that a guy like Bivol could really exploit, whereas if Gvozdyk emerges the winner this weekend, he doesn't offer up as much to exploit as Artur does, not for Bivol. And it just so happens that, you know, Alexander would be the more statuesque guy in the fight if it were him versus Bivol. Essentially what I'm saying is, I think if Gvozdyk wins this weekend, that would be the tougher opponent for Bivol if they were to try to unify thereafter than Artur, because even if Artur wins this weekend, he's got an approach that's more or less easier to understand than Gvozdyk's. The question with Artur is working around that aggression, slowing the fight down, and not getting sucked into a war. I think Bivol can do that. I think he's accurate enough, his hands are fast enough, his punches are straight enough, and he's got good enough in and out game to where this is something he could do. But with Gvozdyk, well, it's a chess match. It's going to take some doing. It would take some doing. So we'll see how the cookie crumbles once it does, and who is going to be the unified light heavyweight champion this weekend. Because regardless of who wins, regardless of who takes it, who becomes the unified champion, Gvozdyk, Beterbiev, whichever one, Bivol himself is going to be under pressure to face the winner of that fight. The boxing community is sick and tired of seeing world champions, titleists, belt holders operating as islands independent of the rest of the weight class. I give Bivol no shtick for having faced Lenin, this past weekend, because given the circumstances, there really weren't that many good names out there available for him to fight. But moving forward, Bivol's the super champion now. He's the super champion. He's the full-fledged WBA champion, and he's got the same expectations from the fight fans that everyone else has, that, you're not an island. You're not the only world champion. You're not the only titleists. This weekend, a unified champion is going to be crowned, and the boxing community expects Bivol to fight that champion at some point. So regardless who wins, regardless whether it's Gvozdyk or Beterbiev, for Bivol, the pressure is on, and I expect that he's going to be paying close attention to this weekend's matchup.